The rawhide whip cracked through the scorching Arizona air like a rifle shot, and Clara Hartwell's body moved before her mind could command it. The braided leather, aimed at 6-year-old Yazi's bare shoulders, caught her instead across the back with a sound like canvas tearing. Fire exploded through her shoulder blade as the lash bit through faded cotton and into flesh, but the physical agony paled against the memory that crashed through her soul. Tommy's final breath fading like desert wind, his small hand growing cold and still in hers as it gripped her fingers one last time. That terrible night when fever claimed her only child. "No," she gasped, pulling Yazi against her chest with fierce desperation. His heart hammered against her ribs like Apache war drums, and his terror-wide dark eyes held the same desperate fear she'd witnessed in Tommy's face during those final hours. Blood soaked through her dress, hot and sticky against skin already burning from desert heat, but Clara barely registered the pain. All her awareness focused on the trembling boy in her arms and the sacred duty carved into her soul by loss. "Stand aside, woman." Dusty Bill swayed like a drunk scarecrow, whiskey fumes rolling off him in waves that mixed sickeningly with tobacco juice, the same smell that had clung to her dead husband's clothes before consumption took him. Boy tried stealing food from decent folks. Needs proper teaching about respecting other people's property. The crowd of 60 souls pressed closer in the blazing noon heat, their faces blurred by shimmering air, rising from dirt, baked hard as pottery. Some nodded approval, hard men, who viewed Apache children as nothing but expendable labor for the territory's expanding copper operations. Others shifted uncomfortably, mothers mostly their maternal instincts warring with the frontier's harsh code. At the boy's throat hung a beaded wristband that caught the harsh, light white quills arranged in a red chevron pattern that spoke of patient hands and careful love. Someone had spent long winter evenings creating that ornament, stitching it with devotion Clara recognized from making clothes for Tommy, when she still believed tomorrow held promise instead of graves. "He's just a baby." Clara set her voice steady despite tremors racking her frame. She looked up at Dusty Bill's florid face, seeing past whiskey-reddened eyes to casual cruelty beneath. What harm could one hungry child possibly do? Harm. Thomas Dietrich stepped forward, his presence dropping the temperature despite brutal heat. At 55, the mine owner carried himself with absolute confidence of a man who'd never heard no applied to his desires. His black wool coat was perfectly tailored, despite the temperature silver watch chain glinting like captured starlight. "The harm, madam, is theft from my legitimate operation. The child attempted to take food without payment. Such criminal behavior cannot be tolerated in any civilized community." Clara's stomach clenched at civilized, from Dietrich's lips. She'd witnessed his civilization at Copper Gulch. Children worked 16 hours in underground darkness, fed scraps and housed like animals until desert heat or tunnel collapse claimed their exhausted lives. A shadow fell across them all, like the wing of death itself. The crowd went silent so suddenly, Clara could hear her heartbeat thundering. A tall figure emerged from the sun's glare like something conjured from Apache war stories that kept frontier children awake with terror. The warrior stood 6 feet in beaded moccasins, broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist that spoke of constant movement. His buckskin shirt, bleached pale by countless desert suns, hung loose over powerful arms marked with old scars, each one a story of survival. Black hair fell to his shoulders in twin braids, decorated with red cloth and eagle feathers that marked his status. His face might have been carved from red sandstone cliffs, high cheekbones, strong jaw, and eyes dark as winter nights that cataloged everything while revealing nothing. Most striking was the Spencer repeating carbine. He carried the 1860 model 7 shots without reloading accurate to 400 yards. The weapon's stock showed wear patterns of constant use by someone whose life depended on its reliability. "Touch him again," the Apache said quietly, "and I will feed that hand to desert vultures while you watch." Deputy Eric Magnus jerked his own Spencer carbine to his shoulder from the wooden boardwalk. "Hold it right there, Savage." His voice cracked, betraying nerves stretched taut. The Apache ignored the weapon, moving to kneel beside Clara. His weathered fingers touched the beaded wristband at Yazi's throat, lifting it so white quills caught harsh light. Clara saw something raw and desperate flicker behind his controlled mask. "This pattern," he said, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My sister's work. Nayeli made 2 such bands, one for her child." His dark eyes lifted to meet Clara's. "Could this boy carry my blood?" Before Clara could answer, Sheriff Robert Klaus pushed through the crowd with predatory grace that spoke of more than desk work. At 45, Klaus moved like a professional manhunter, his badge gleaming, but his eyes holding calculating coldness. Clara had heard whispers about Klaus, stories of men who crossed him disappearing into the desert of Apache raids that seemed to know exactly when and where to strike for maximum profit. "And nobody moves until I say so." Klaus announced, his hand resting on his holstered Colt Army revolver, the 1860 model standard territorial issue. "That boy's legally bound to Mr. Dietrich's operation under territorial apprenticeship statutes. That's law and order, and I enforce both in this town." The Apache rose slowly. 6 days I have tracked this child," he said, voice carrying like distant thunder. 6 days across badlands, following wagon ruts and cold ashes from the raid that scattered my people like autumn leaves. "The boy belongs where territorial law declares—" Dietrich interrupted with absolute certainty. "Copper Gulch Mining has paid proper fees for his apprenticeship contract. He will work off his lawful debt according to established territorial statute." Clara felt something crack inside her chest, the same breaking sensation when Tommy drew his last breath. She'd witnessed Dietrich's apprenticeship. Children worked dawn to dusk underground for scraps and sleeping space in company barracks, little better than animal pens. Most lasted a year before desert heat or darkness claimed them. "He's 6 years old." Clara said, her voice carrying maternal authority that made several men in the crowd shift uncomfortably. What debt could any child that age possibly owe to anyone? Dusty Bill's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Debt of being born Apache woman. Cost us plenty in soldiers and supplies to bring these savages to proper civilization." The Apache went absolutely still, like a mountain cat that had caught scent of prey or predator. When he moved again, it was like water flowing over stone, beautiful and deadly in its perfect economy of motion. His fingers closed on the beaded wristband at Yazi's throat, lifting it so white quills caught and scattered harsh desert light. "This is Nayeli's work," he said, voice thick with controlled anguish. White quills arranged in red chevron pattern according to old traditions. "My sister made only 2 such bands in her lifetime. One for her child, one for the man who swore by blood and honor to protect that child from all earthly harm." Klaus studied the Apache with professional interest, like a hunter examining dangerous prey. He'd tracked Apache war parties across 100-mile stretches of desert, had learned their ways before betraying and killing his Apache scouts for Dietrich's gold. This wouldn't be easy prey, but Klaus lived for the challenge of worthy adversaries. "Step away from Dietrich's property, Indian," last warning. The answer came as gunfire. Magnus's Spencer cracked bullet chipping the water trough and sending splinters flying like angry hornets. The Apache moved faster than thought, shoving Clara and Yazi behind barrel-shaped cover while drawing his own weapon in one fluid motion. His Spencer spoke twice in rapid succession reports, echoing off false-fronted buildings like rolling thunder. The first shot took Magnus in the shoulder, spinning him around like a child's top. The second knocked the whip from Dusty Bill's hand, leaving him staring at his suddenly empty palm with shocked expression. Schoolteacher Beatrice Nora screamed from across the square, her voice high and pure above sudden chaos erupting around them. The crowd scattered like startled quail, diving for cover behind wagons and water barrels, while women grabbed their children and ran for doorways. "Move." Clara grabbed Yaji and ran her wounded shoulders, screaming protest with every jarring step. The Apache, who'd called himself Chato during their desperate flight, vaulted the water trough with fluid grace, knocked Klaus's rifle aside with his forearm, and sent the sheriff sprawling face first in dust. Klaus rolled to his feet with fluid motion, blood trickling from a split lip, but his eyes bright with predatory excitement. This was what he lived for, the hunt, the challenge of worthy prey. He'd make them pay for that humiliation. But he'd do it properly, methodically, the way he'd learned hunting men across the territorial wastes. $500 gold for the Apache. Klaus bellowed to his men, but his mind was already calculating angles, escape routes, water sources. "And I want them alive if possible. Dead men tell no tales, but living ones can be made to sing like birds." Then all three fugitives were sprinting for the narrow alley between Morrison's Mercantile and Henderson's barbershop, with their boots pounding on hard-packed earth, while behind them, Klaus organized his pursuit with military precision. Chato led them through a maze of backlots, refuse heaps and chicken coops, with the sure step of someone who'd scouted every foot of ground before making his move. Clara clutched Yaji to her chest, feeling his small body shaking with terror and exhaustion, while her own strength ebbed with each drop of blood soaking through her dress. The shoulder wound burned like liquid fire with every stride, but she'd carried Tommy through worse nights during his final illness. Memory of her son's weight in her arms gave her strength she hadn't known she still possessed. They reached Willow Springs' ragged edge, where buildings gave way to sage juniper and the endless expanse of Arizona territory, stretching away like a brown ocean under the merciless sun. A bay horse waited exactly where Chato had positioned it, tied to scrub oak and loaded with supplies that spoke of careful preparation for this rescue attempt. He boosted Clara and Yaji into the saddle with economical grace, then swung up behind them. "Where can we possibly go that they won't follow?" Clara gasped, her lungs burning in thin, superheated air. "Away from here before they organize proper pursuit and bring tracking dogs to the hunt." Chato replied, touching heels to the bay's flanks with gentle authority. "Distance first, then we find defensive ground." The horse settled into ground-eating lope that carried them toward broken country south of town, where red rock formations and hidden canyons offered both shelter and danger to those who understood desert's harsh rules. Behind them, dust clouds marked pursuit building like storm fronts on the horizon, and Clara could hear the thunder of multiple horses and distant shouts of men drunk on the prospect of violence and substantial reward money. Klaus was already deploying his men with calculated precision. "Thompson, take 3 men and circle south to Devil's Canyon, cut off their retreat if they try for high country. Martinez, you and your boys cover the river crossings at Willow Creek and Ash River. I'll follow the main trail with the tracking dogs." His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to commanding life and death operations. "Remember, the Apache knows this country like his own heartbeat. But I know how he thinks. He'll head for high ground and water. We'll be waiting when he gets there." The land dropped steadily toward Ash River, where cottonwoods marked the water's ancient course through red stone canyons and alkali flats that stretched to distant mountain ranges, wavering like mirages in the heat. The air tasted of dust and sage, and the metallic tang of approaching violence carried on desert wind that offered no mercy to the weak or unprepared. They reached the river, where it ran shallow over beds of black shale water, clear as window glass, but warm as blood under the afternoon sun. Chato didn't hesitate, driving the bay straight into the current, while bullets began to whistle overhead with a distinctive whine of lead-seeking flesh and bone. The shots came from 6 mounted riders who'd found their range at the river, crossing muzzle flashes, winking like deadly fireflies in cottonwood shadows. One round clipped a branch directly above Clara's head, sending green leaves spiraling down around them like nature's confetti celebrating violence. Another bullet smacked into water with sharp crack, sending up geyser that soaked them all with river water, feeling shockingly cold against sun-heated skin. But Klaus had anticipated this move. While his men engaged at the obvious crossing, he'd positioned himself downstream with clear fields of fire and perfect understanding of Apache tactics. His rifle cracked with professional precision bullet, passing so close to Chato's head that the warrior felt wind of its passage. Predictable, Klaus muttered to himself, already moving to his next firing position. Apache always use water as escape route when pressed. But you're thinking like a war party, not fugitives with precious cargo slowing you down. The bay stumbled badly on slick rocks and nearly went down, pitching Clara forward in saddle with jarring force that drove breath from her lungs. She kicked free with Yaji, clutched in her arms, hitting water with splash that flooded her mouth with taste of minerals and mud. The shock made her gasp involuntarily, and river water burned her throat like liquid stone, while rifle fire continued peppering the surface around them. Chato grabbed bridle and steadied their panicked mount while bullets sought flesh with mechanical persistence. They struggled toward far bank, through willows and cattails that whipped at faces like angry fingers, Clara's waterlogged dress clinging to legs and making each step a battle against exhaustion and sucking mud of riverbank. On solid ground, Chato pushed them up through dense brush, while turning to face pursuers with Spencer ready for action. His weapon spoke 3 times in measured succession, each shot placed with precision of a man who'd learned marksmanship in Apache wars against Mexican and American soldiers, who gave no quarter and expected none in return. Across river, a horse screamed in pain and went down at ford, pitching its rider into shallow water with splash that sent remaining riders scrambling for cover among trees. They took shelter under an undercut bank where spring floods had carved natural caves in red clay deposited over countless years of high water. The air inside felt cool and damp, smelling of earth and old water, and the indefinable scent of temporary safety. Clara's shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat where Whip had opened flesh, and she could feel wound beginning to fester in desert heat that turned minor injuries into death sentences without proper medical care. Chato noticed her wince and moved to examine injury without asking permission or offering false comfort. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he cleaned cut with precious water from their limited supply, then bound it with strip torn from his own shirt. The cloth smelled of wood smoke and tanned leather, and indefinable scent of open country that clung to men who lived under stars instead of roofs. The wristband, Clara said quietly, watching him check Yazi's feet for stone bruises, with same careful attention she'd once given Tommy's scraped knees. What makes you think this child might be yours? Chato's hands stilled on Boy's ankle-weathered features, revealing more pain than any physical wound could cause. For a long moment, Warrior's mask slipped entirely, and Clara saw raw grief beneath his controlled exterior loss that matched her own in its devastating completeness. My woman died birthing our first child 3 summers past, he said, voice flat as stone, but carrying undertones of anguish that time couldn't heal. Fever took them both during difficult birth before Apache midwife could save either one. Her name was Ayana. It means eternal blossom. I have been searching for them in face of every Apache child I encounter, wanting desperately for it to be true, despite what common sense tells me. The brutal honesty in his admission hit Clara like physical blow. She recognized that desperate hope instantly. She'd felt it herself every time she saw a boy with Tommy's coloring or heard child's laugh that reminded her of her son's joy before sickness stole it away. The human heart proved endlessly cruel in its ability to manufacture hope from thinnest possible evidence. "The woman who pressed this band into my hands," Clara said carefully, choosing each word with deliberate precision. "She was already dying when I found her west of Prairie Rose last winter. Shot through the back, blood frothing on her lips with each labored breath. She begged me with her final strength to keep her boy safe from the men who'd burned her camp and killed her people." She paused, watching Chato's face for any sign of recognition, while Yaji dozed against her chest, exhausted by terror and flight that had become his daily existence. She spoke one name before death claimed her: Nayeli. Called this boy her heart, her only reason for continuing to draw breath in a world gone mad with violence. Chato went absolutely still, hands frozen on Yazi's foot, as if child might dissolve into desert air if he moved wrong. When he looked up, his eyes held something Clara had never seen before, recognition mixed with grief so profound it seemed to bend reality around its intensity. "Nayeli was my sister," he whispered, each word seeming to cost him everything he possessed. "This child is her son. My nephew, not the son I lost to fever and failed hope." The admission cleared his eyes of desperate longing, leaving behind something harder and infinitely more dangerous purpose, backed by righteous fury and blood obligation. She made 2 wristbands with this exact pattern, according to old traditions. One for her boy, one for me to remind me of my sacred promise to protect him if harm ever came to their family. Meanwhile, Klaus was reading their trail with professional expertise, his eyes cataloging broken twigs, disturbed earth, and the subtle way grass bent under fleeing feet. His Apache scouts had taught him well before he'd betrayed and killed them for Dietrich's gold, learning their secrets before eliminating the teachers. "They're heading for high country," he told his Lieutenant Rollins, a scarred veteran who'd learned manhunting during the war between the states. "Water source defensive position, multiple escape routes. The Apaches thinking tactically, but the woman's slowing them down, blood loss, infection starting to set in. Give it 6 hours and she'll be dead weight dragging them all down." As purple shadows began creeping across the desert and first stars appeared in darkening sky, like distant campfires, Clara, Chato, and Yaji found temporary shelter in wind-carved cave high in canyon walls. The entrance was hidden by curtain of creosote bush, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look and how to approach without leaving tracks for pursuers to follow. Inside, cave stretched back into comfortable darkness floor carpeted with sand that held no footprints to betray their presence to hunting parties. Ancient pictographs covered walls, handprints and animal figures left by people who'd sought shelter here centuries before Europeans ever dreamed of this continent's existence. Clara traced faded images with fingertips, wondering what stories they told, and whether those long-dead artists had faced similar desperate flights from enemies who saw them as less than human. Chato shared jerky and parched corn from his carefully prepared pack, simple food that tasted better than any feast after their day of desperate flight across hostile terrain. Yazi ate hungrily, dark eyes darting between Clara and his newly discovered uncle, as if trying to understand strange turns his young life had taken in space of few terrifying hours. When Boy spoke in rapid Apache, Chato's stern features softened with something approaching tenderness. The harsh warrior who'd faced down armed men in Willow Springs transformed into gentle uncle, comforting frightened child who'd endured more trauma than most adults could survive. "What is he saying?" Clara asked, noting how natural interaction seemed despite their recent meeting. He asks if you are his new mother. Chato replied, voice rough with emotion, threatening to overwhelm his careful control. He remembers his birth mother dying in raid, but details have faded like morning mist. Dietrich's men told him his family was dead, that he belonged to them now, and would never see his people or homeland again. Clara's throat tightened with familiar grief as she reached out to smooth Yazi's dark hair, feeling same protective instinct that had driven her to Tommy's bedside through endless fever nights. The sensation was so strong, it made her dizzy, this overwhelming need to shield innocent life from harm, regardless of cost to herself. "Tell him I am his friend," she said softly. "Tell him we will never let bad men take him back to that terrible dark place where children disappear underground forever." Through the long night, Clara and Chato took turns on watch, speaking quietly during exchanges that built understanding between two people thrust together by circumstance and united by common cause. Clara told him about Tommy, about the wagon train, where fever had claimed her son despite all her desperate efforts to save him. She spoke of the promise she'd made over his small grave to protect children who couldn't protect themselves from adult cruelty and greed. Chato spoke of his sister Nayeli, of the raid that had scattered his people like leaves before winter wind. "She was stubborn like you," he said with ghost of a smile that transformed his weathered features. "Always putting herself between danger and those she loved. She would have liked you, I think would have recognized a kindred spirit in someone willing to risk everything for a child, not her own. I wish I could have known her." Clara replied, feeling genuine regret for the woman whose final act had been pressing a beaded wristband into a stranger's hands with desperate plea to save her child. Anyone who could love a child enough to create something that beautiful must have been special. "She was," Chato agreed quietly, "the best of us in many ways. Her death, it broke something in our band that will never heal properly. But seeing her son alive, knowing he has chance for different future, perhaps that is how healing begins." As dawn broke over the desert like fire spreading across dry grass, they began their reconnaissance of Copper Gulch mining operation. The industrial complex sprawled across hillside like malignant growth, various buildings connected by wooden walkways and narrow-gauge rail lines that carried ore cars between mine shaft and stamp mill in endless mechanical rhythm. Timber head frames squatted over main shaft like enormous gallows, creosote-blackened beams, stark against morning sky that promised another day of brutal heat. From their concealed observation point on basalt outcrop, half-mile distant, Clara could see entire layouts spread below them, like detailed military map prepared for tactical assault. Guard towers flanked main gate, manned by riflemen, whose weapons glinted in strengthening sunlight. Freight wagons rolled between mine and mill, under heavy armed escort, their loads of copper ore protected more carefully than bank shipments traveling between territorial cities. But it was structure behind main office building that made Clara's stomach clench with rage and revulsion that threatened to overwhelm her self-control. A cage built from iron bars and mounted on wagon wheels sat in shade of wooden water tower. And even from this distance, she could see small figures moving inside children who'd attempted escape and been brought back as examples to terrorize others into compliance with system that treated human beings as expendable resources. "There," she pointed with hand that shook despite efforts to control it. "That's where they keep boys who try to run away from their so-called apprenticeships." Chato's knuckles went white where they gripped Spencer carbine. Clara could feel rage radiating from him, like heat from blacksmith's forge. But his voice remained level and controlled when he spoke tone of warrior who'd learned to master emotion in order to function effectively in combat situations where clear thinking meant difference between life and death. "We need solid evidence," Chato said grimly, dark eyes reflecting morning light like obsidian mirrors polished to deadly sharpness. Proof that will force territorial authorities to act against entire system, not just individual cases that can be dismissed or covered up by Dietrich's influence and money. That evening, as purple shadows crept across desert and coal oil lamps began flickering to life in distant farmsteads, Clara made her way alone to Hugh Percy's homestead, while Chato and Yaji waited concealed in brush that offered both hiding place and quick escape route if things went wrong. Hugh Percy's small farm squatted in fold of hills where seasonal creek provided just enough water to keep few precious acres green during growing season. That meant difference between survival and starvation for his family. The house was adobe and timber construction, patched with whatever materials Hugh could scavenge or afford, but clean and well-maintained despite obvious poverty that marked every aspect of frontier existence. She found Hugh by his makeshift corral mending harness by yellow light of coal oil lantern, while his wife and 3 young children slept safely inside house that represented everything he'd worked to build and protect in this harsh land. His hands shook slightly as he worked, whether from fatigue or cheap whiskey she could smell on his breath, Clara couldn't determine. When she emerged from shadows, like ghost materializing from desert darkness, he started so violently he nearly dropped leather he was repairing. "Clara, sweet lord in heaven, what are you doing here in middle of night? Whole territory is hunting for you and that Apache warrior. Dietrich's offering reward money that could buy man his own spread of decent land." She moved into circle of lamplight, letting him see her blood-stained dress and exhausted features marked by fever that was beginning to build in her system as infection took hold. The shoulder wound had begun to fester visibly red streaks, radiating from original injury in pattern that spoke of blood poisoning spreading through her body with potentially fatal results. "I need your help, Hugh," she said, simply cutting through his protests before they could fully form. "And I think you already know why I'm here asking for it." His eyes darted nervously toward the house where his family slept in innocent trust that their father would protect them from all harm, and then back to her face. Fear and guilt warred in his expression, creating haunted look of man who knew right from wrong, but lacked courage to act on convictions when action carried deadly consequences. But Hugh's face also held something else, a deeper fear that went beyond simple cowardice or concern for his own safety. "I have to tell you something," he said, unable to meet her eyes directly. "Something I already did that I'm not proud of." Clara felt ice form in her stomach as Hugh continued with obvious self-loathing. "I sent smoke signal earlier today when I saw you heading this direction. Dietrich's men will be watching river crossings come morning, maybe sooner if they read the sign correctly." The betrayal hit Clara like physical blow, but she could see genuine anguish in Hugh's face as he pulled out carefully folded papers from beneath his workbench. "But I also made copies of everything before I sent that signal, every document I could lay hands on, every record of children brought through here. Hid them where Dietrich will never find them, even if he tears this place apart board by board." Clara stared at him, understanding finally that Hugh Percy was more complex than she'd realized, a man capable of both betrayal and redemption. Fear and courage existing in same tormented soul, struggling to do right thing despite impossible circumstances. "And why tell me this now instead of letting us walk into trap?" Hugh's voice broke as he looked toward house where his family slept. "Because my boy Samuel asked about Apache children yesterday. Asked why they looked so scared and thin, why they couldn't play like other children he sees in town. I couldn't answer him, then didn't have words to explain what I've been helping support through my silence and cowardice." He paused, meeting her eyes with steady gaze, despite tears streaming down weathered cheeks. "When you told me about Yaji, about what they were really doing to him in that mine, I saw my own son's face in that Apache boy. Samuel's the same age, has the same way of looking at world like it should be fair and good. I realized I'd rather lose everything Landhouse, even my life, than have to explain to my boys someday why I did nothing when I could have acted to save innocent children from slavery and death. Clara felt her own eyes burning with tears she hadn't known she was still capable of shedding. Hugh Percy, the frightened farmer she had judged so harshly, had been conducting his own quiet investigation all along, documenting atrocities even as he participated in system that enabled them preparing for day when he might find courage to act on his convictions despite terrible personal cost. They spent next hour planning their desperate gambit with methodical care that such enterprises demanded if they were to have any chance of success against overwhelming odds. Hugh would create fire distraction at Hay Barn near midnight, drawing guards away from administrative office. Clara and Chato would use resulting chaos to break into building and steal whatever records they could carry in time available. There's Hay Barn on north side of mining complex. Hugh explained, his voice growing steadier as he committed fully to course of action. Store's winter feed for animals that work operation year-round. If it catches fire around midnight when guards change shifts, that'll draw every man in compound to fight blaze before it spreads to more valuable structures. How long would it burn? Clara asked. Long enough for your purposes, Hugh replied grimly. That hay's been stored there since spring cutting season. Dry as tinder in this heat, stacked to rafters like kindling waiting for spark. Once it catches proper fire, nothing will stop it from burning to ground except lack of fuel to feed flames. As Clara prepared to leave, Hugh grabbed her arm with desperate urgency. There's one more thing you need to know. Klaus isn't just corrupt sheriff taking bribes. He's former Army scout who learned Apache tracking methods before going rogue. The man's a professional manhunter who's killed more Indians than smallpox. You're not just running from territorial law, you're being hunted by someone who knows exactly how Apaches think and move. Clara felt chill run down her spine, despite desert heat still radiating from rocks around them. How do you know this? Because he bragged about it, Hugh said bitterly. Told me once how he'd gained Apache scouts' trust, learned all their secrets, then sold them out to army units looking to make names for themselves, killing Indians. Said tracking was just like hunting any other dangerous animal. You had to think like your prey to catch them. Back in their cave shelter, Clara relayed this information to Chato, watching his face harden as implications sank in. Explains much, he said grimly. Why pursuit has been so methodical, so professional. Klaus knows our ways because he learned them from us before betraying teachers for white man's gold. Does that change our plans? Chato checked his Spencer carbine with practiced movements, counting ammunition and testing action with mechanical precision of someone whose life had always depended on weapon maintenance. Changes nothing. We still need evidence to expose Dietrich's operation. But now we know enemy we face is more dangerous than simple corrupt lawman. Klaus will anticipate our moves, try to think like Apache to predict where we'll go next. So what do we do differently? We stop thinking like Apaches, Chato said with grim smile that held no warmth but promised retribution. Time to be unpredictable, to do what Klaus won't expect from warriors trained in traditional ways. Sometimes best strategy is to abandon everything you've been taught and improvise based on enemies' expectations. At exactly midnight, red glow appeared on northern horizon as Hugh Percy's hay barn caught fire according to plan. Within minutes, it had grown into substantial bonfire that painted low-hanging clouds orange and sent sparks dancing high into star-filled sky like earthbound constellations celebrating destruction of evil enterprise. Shouts erupted from mining complex as night guards spotted blaze and realized implications for their operation's survival. Clara and Chato watched men pour from barracks and guard stations like disturbed ants, voices raised in alarm as they grasped scope of emergency threatening to spread throughout compound, if not contained immediately. Now! Chato breathed, and they moved down slope like shadows, given deadly form and purpose that could not be deterred by human opposition. The administrative office sat apart from main compound, connected to other buildings by wooden walkway that creaked ominously under their feet as they approached with weapons ready for resistance. Clara's heart hammered against ribs so hard she feared sound might betray their presence, as Chato worked knife blade carefully into door lock metal, scraping softly against mechanism in sound that seemed loud as gunshots in desert stillness. Behind them, more men were running toward fire voices raised in panic as they realized full scope of disaster threatening to destroy months of carefully accumulated wealth extracted from children suffering. Hugh's distraction was working perfectly, but Clara knew their window of opportunity was measured in minutes, not hours that comfortable planning might have provided. The lock gave way with soft click that made her flinch involuntarily despite preparation. They slipped inside like ghosts entering tomb, Clara's hands shaking as she struck match and lit coal oil lamp sitting on Dietrich's massive oak desk. Yellow light flooded room, revealing shelves lined with leather-bound ledger books and filing cabinets stuffed with papers that documented mining companies' various operations in meticulous detail, designed to hide systematic evil behind veneer of legitimate business. There, Chato pointed to thick volume marked with current year in gold lettering that caught lamplight like captured fire. Employment and contract records for current operations. Clara opened book with trembling fingers, scanning page after page of entries written in various hands that told story of systematic evil operating under legal protection. What she found documented there made her stomach turn with revulsion and rage that threatened to overwhelm self-control necessary for completing their mission successfully. Children's names were listed like livestock inventory ages, physical descriptions, purchase prices, and work assignments recorded with mechanical precision that treated human beings as disposable resources to be consumed for profit. Some entries were crossed out with notations like deceased escaped or simply written off as total loss. The casual brutality of it was breathtaking young lives, reduced to accounting entries in ledger that might have been recording cattle or mining equipment for all humanity, it acknowledged in its cold calculations. But page near back of book made her gasp aloud, in horrified recognition of evil's true scope and systematic nature. Detailed list under heading Special Acquisition Operations contained names, dates, and locations that corresponded exactly to Apache raids across territory over past 2 years. Yazi's name appeared there, along with dozens of others, each accompanied by purchase price and signature of territorial official who had approved transaction as legal and proper under existing statutes governing Indian labor contracts. Look at this, she whispered urgently, showing Chato damning evidence spread before them like map of systematic child murder disguised as legitimate business enterprise. They're not simply buying children from independent raiders operating for profit. They're commissioning specific raids themselves, paying bounties for Apache children captured alive and delivered to their operations for forced labor that amounts to slavery. Chato's face went hard as granite as he read over her shoulder, weathered features becoming mask of controlled fury that promised terrible retribution for those responsible for this monstrous system operating under protection of territorial law. "My sister's name," he said quietly, pointing to entry dated 6 months earlier with handwriting that remained steady despite obvious effort required to maintain composure. Nayeli, adult female, shot while resisting capture during authorized raid. Child successfully recovered and designated for Copper Gulch mining operation. The clinical language describing his sister's murder and nephew's kidnapping hung between them like death sentence. For everyone involved in conspiracy that reached into highest levels of territorial government and beyond. Clara tore incriminating pages carefully from ledger, folding them with precise movements and tucking them inside dress alongside original purchase order that had started their investigation into this network of systematic child exploitation. Outside commotion was growing louder as more men joined firefighting effort to save valuable feed supplies from flames that threatened to spread throughout complex if not contained quickly. Clara could hear horses being saddled hastily and wagons loaded with water barrels in desperate attempt to control blaze before it destroyed everything Dietrich had built through years of systematic child exploitation disguised as legitimate mining operation. "We need additional documentation," Chato said, pulling files systematically from Dietrich's desk drawers while keeping watch on approaches to building through windows that offered clear view of compound. "Financial records correspondence, anything that demonstrates full scope of this conspiracy and its connections throughout territorial government and army command structure." Clara found what they desperately needed in locked drawer that Chato forced with knife-point letters between Dietrich and officials throughout territory, detailing arrangements for child labor purchases and division of profits from various operations that stretched across multiple jurisdictions in coordinated network. Payment receipts for Apache scalps proved mining company was actively funding extermination campaigns designed to generate more captive children for forced labor programs operating under legal protection. Most damning was detailed map showing locations of planned future raids and estimated numbers of children that could be captured at each targeted site based on intelligence gathered from various sources, including corrupt Indian agents and army officers. The scope of conspiracy was staggering in its calculated evil. What Clara had assumed was isolated cruelty of one man revealed itself as territorial network involving sheriffs, army officers, territorial officials, and mining companies across Arizona and New Mexico territories, operating in perfect coordination. Mere sweet mother of God. Clara breathed, staring at receipt for 30 Chinese children purchased from smuggling operation in California that promised steady supply of young workers for expanding mining operations throughout Southwest. How many children have they murdered for profit over the years this has been operating? Before Chato could respond to her horrified question, lantern light blazed suddenly through window and harsh voice called out from wooden walkway outside building. "Office light is burning. Someone is inside the building right now." They moved without conscious thought, operating on pure survival instinct, honed by desperation that left no room for hesitation or second thoughts about consequences of failure. Clara stuffed remaining papers hastily into her dress, while Chato grabbed cloth bag from desk and swept loose documents into it with economical movements that spoke of man accustomed to working efficiently under deadly pressure from armed enemies. Front door rattled violently as someone tested handle with increasing urgency, then splintered inward as heavy boots kicked it open with brutal force that sent wooden fragments flying like shrapnel seeking targets. "There they are." Guards stood silhouetted in doorway, rifle raised and ready to fire at first sign of resistance from intruders. "Freeze or die where you stand." Chato's knife took man in throat before he could pull trigger blade, moving so fast Clara barely saw motion that ended guard's life in spray of arterial blood that painted wooden walls with crimson testimony to violence necessary for justice. Guard dropped with gurgling cry that was cut short by death, his life's blood spreading across wooden floorboards, an expanding pool that reflected lamplight, like dark mirror of violence and retribution. More shouts erupted outside as other guards realized what was happening and began converging on office building from all directions with weapons ready for battle that would determine whether justice or corruption prevailed in this remote corner of Arizona territory. Clara and Chato went out through back window in rapid succession, Clara first with her precious burden of stolen evidence. then bag of additional documents that might prove crucial in building case against entire network. Chato paused only long enough to upturn oil lamp and send burning fuel spreading across Dietrich's desk and remaining papers that couldn't be saved from flames. Fire caught immediately, racing across documents and climbing wooden walls like hungry animals seeking fresh fuel to feed their appetite for destruction of everything connected to systematic evil that had operated here for too long. Run hard and don't look back. Chato commanded, pushing Clara toward River with urgent authority born of combat experience that had kept him alive through years of warfare against enemies who showed no mercy to prisoners. Stop for nothing until we reach Canyon Country, where Apache knowledge gives us advantage over pursuers who lack such specialized understanding of desert survival. Behind them, Administrative Office was already becoming pillar of fire that lit up night sky like signal beacon announcing end of Dietrich's reign of terror over innocent children, whose only crime had been being born into wrong race at wrong time in territorial history. Men ran frantically from all directions, abandoning hay barn fire to deal with new crisis that threatened heart of their operations and all records that might implicate them in systematic criminal enterprise operating under protection of corrupt territorial government. They reached Cottonwoods as rifles began cracking behind them, muzzle flashes winking like deadly stars in darkness surrounding burning building that served as funeral pyre for Dietrich's evil empire. Bullets whined overhead, with distinctive sound of lead-seeking flesh and bone-clipping branches and sending leaves raining down around them like green snow, celebrating violence and chaos that had been unleashed by their desperate action against systematic oppression. At Riverbank, Chato's horse waited exactly where they had positioned it, earlier ears pricked forward alertly at sound of gunfire and human shouting that echoed across desert like war cries of ancient battles between civilizations that could find no common ground for coexistence. They mounted quickly despite Clara's wounded shoulder, screaming protest with each movement, Yaji behind her, clinging desperately to her waist, while precious documents crackled against her chest with each jarring stride. Chato swung up last Spencer carbine ready as organized pursuit began forming behind them into coherent hunting party, equipped with weapons horses and determination to recover stolen evidence at any cost to human life or moral principle. Bay horse responded to heel pressure with powerful surge of muscle and bone, lunging up far bank with strides that carried them toward broken country, where Apache knowledge of terrain might provide temporary advantage over their pursuers who lacked such specialized knowledge of desert survival. But Klaus was already reading their movement with professional expertise earned through years of hunting human prey across territorial wastes. Predictable, he muttered to his Lieutenant Rawlins, studying dust cloud raised by fleeing horse in light of burning buildings. Apaches heading for high country water defensible positions, multiple escape routes. But the woman slowing them down with that shoulder wound and infection will be setting in soon. Give it 12 hours and she'll be more burden than asset. Klaus deployed his men with calculated precision that spoke of military training and extensive experience coordinating manhunts across difficult terrain. Martinez, take your boys and circle south through Devil's Canyon, cut off their retreat if they try for Mexican border. Thompson, cover river crossings at Willow Creek and Ash River in case they double back. I'll follow main trail with tracking dogs and half the men. His voice carried absolute authority of someone accustomed to commanding life and death operations where failure meant death for hunter as well as hunted. Remember what we're dealing with, trained Apache warrior who knows this country like his own heartbeat, plus woman who's proved she's got tactical mind and willingness to kill when cornered. Don't underestimate either one, and don't give them chance to set ambush. We take them alive if possible, but dead works just as well for our purposes. The chase that followed became deadly game of strategy and endurance, played out across miles of broken desert that showed no mercy to weak or unprepared. Klaus pushed his quarry relentlessly through night and into blazing heat of next day, using superior numbers and knowledge of Apache tactics learned from betrayed teachers to anticipate every move Chato might make. Clara's condition deteriorated rapidly as infection spread through her system like poison carried by desert wind. Blood poisoning was claiming her by degrees, red streaks radiating from original whip wound in pattern that spoke of approaching death without proper medical intervention. She swayed dangerously in saddle as fever and exhaustion combined to blur landscape into wavering mirages that seemed to dance just beyond her failing vision. Only Chato's steady arm around her waist kept her from falling, as consciousness threatened to abandon her entirely to mercy of pursuing enemies who would show none if they succeeded in running their quarry to ground. Yazi pressed against her back, his small body providing warmth and comfort that reminded her of holding Tommy during those final fever nights when medicine couldn't reach burning sickness that consumed him from within. When Boy's sharp eyes spotted telltale dust cloud of final pursuit against heat-shimmered horizon, Clara knew they were out of time and realistic options for escape. 8 men, possibly 10. Chato observed grimly after studying distant riders with professional assessment. Moving fast along our exact trail, following dogs without deviation from scent track we've left behind us. He looked at Clara, taking in her flushed face and glassy eyes, with clinical evaluation of someone who had seen many people die from similar infections in harsh conditions where medical help was luxury few could afford. They will overtake us before noon, sun reaches peak. We cannot outrun them with you in this condition, and child slowing our pace significantly. Clara forced herself to sit straighter in saddle fighting against fever that wanted to drag her into unconsciousness and surrender. That would mean death for all of them and victory for systematic evil they'd risked everything to expose. If she was going to die in this place, it would be fighting to protect child she had sworn to save, and evidence that could prevent countless other children from suffering similar fates at hands of those who saw innocence as commodity to be exploited for profit. Then we choose our battlefield, she said with as much strength as she could muster despite failing body and spreading infection. Find good defensive ground and make them pay dearly for what they want from us. But Chato was already shaking his head tactical mind, analyzing options with speed that had kept him alive, guided through years of warfare against enemies who possessed superior numbers and weapons, but lacked his intimate knowledge of desert survival. Not an open country where they can use numbers against us. Too little cover, too many angles of attack for small force to defend effectively. He pointed toward line of red cliffs rising from desert floor, like ancient fortress walls built by gods to shelter those who understood their secrets. There, canyon entrance offers superior defensive positions, reliable water source, multiple escape routes if situation becomes completely untenable. They changed course toward cliffs while their pursuers closed distance with mechanical inevitability that spoke of professional manhunters who had tracked other human beings across these same wastes for profit and brought them back alive or dead, depending on which option paid better in current market for such services. Clara could make out individual riders, now their faces grim with determination and promise of substantial reward money that would make their families wealthy if they succeeded in recovering stolen evidence and eliminating witnesses who could testify against systematic conspiracy. The canyon mouth proved exactly what Chato had promised, narrow defile between towering walls of red sandstone that provided excellent sight lines for defenders, while restricting approaches for attacking forces to predictable channels that could be covered by accurate rifle fire. Natural spring bubbled from rocks near entrance, creating small pool of precious water surrounded by enough vegetation to provide concealment for their exhausted horse, while they prepared defensive positions among ancient stones. Chato positioned their small force with tactical expertise of someone who had fought this type of engagement many times before, against various enemies who possessed superior numbers but lacked knowledge of terrain that could be turned to deadly advantage by those who understood desert's harsh lessons. Clara and Yaji took cover behind large boulder that commanded canyon entrance with clear fields of fire, while Chato climbed higher up slope to position that would allow him to deliver enfilading fire against any assault on their position. When they come within range, he called down to her voice, carrying clearly in thin desert air. Shoot horses first if possible. Puts them afoot and equalizes odds somewhat in our favor. Clara checked loads in her borrowed Spencer carbine with hands that trembled from fever and exhaustion, 7 rounds in tubular magazine, plus 1 already chambered and ready to fire. 8 bullets to hold off 10 professional killers equipped with superior weapons and unlimited ammunition supplies. The odds were not favorable by any reasonable calculation, but she would make each shot count for maximum effect against enemies who had chosen to profit from children's suffering. The weight stretched endlessly under blazing sun that turned their rock shelter into natural oven that baked moisture from bodies already weakened by infection and exhaustion from days of desperate flight. Heat rose from stone in shimmering waves that made accurate shooting more difficult, and Clara's fever made everything seem distant and unreal, like images viewed through thick window glass that distorted perception and made precise aim nearly impossible. Beside her, Yaji crouched in Boulder's shadow with patient alertness of someone far older than his 6-year child, who had learned through bitter experience that survival often depended on absolute stillness and silence. When predators were hunting nearby, and any sound or movement might bring death swooping down like desert hawks seeking prey. "Clara," he said softly, voice small and uncertain in vast desert silence, broken only by whisper of wind through stone arches carved by countless flash floods over geological ages. "Will bad men take me back to dark place where children disappear underground forever and never see sunlight again?" Clara reached out to touch his face with hand that burned with fever, heat feeling coolness of his skin against her palm like blessing from somewhere beyond. On this harsh land of violence and systematic cruelty that treated innocence as commodity to be bought and sold. Despite deteriorating condition that threatened to overwhelm her consciousness entirely, she managed to inject confidence into voice that she was far from feeling in her failing heart. "I know, sweetheart." She promised with conviction, born of absolute determination that transcended physical weakness and approaching death. "Whatever happens here today, you are never going back to that terrible place. I give you my sacred word on that promise, and I have never broken vow made to child in my entire life." Boy nodded solemnly, accepting her promise with absolute trust that children gave to adults they believed could protect them from harm that surrounded them on all sides in a world that seemed designed to destroy innocence for profit of those who had abandoned all moral principles in pursuit of wealth extracted from suffering of helpless victims. The attack came without warning, sudden thunder of hooves echoing off canyon walls, as Klaus led his men in coordinated assault designed to overwhelm their position through speed and superior numbers, before defenders could organize effective resistance or retreat to better ground. Clara's first shot dropped lead horse with precision, born of desperation and maternal fury, sending its rider tumbling across rocks in shower of dust and profanity that echoed off stone walls like curses upon all those who had harmed children for profit. Her second shot took down another mount, creating barrier of thrashing animals that effectively blocked canyon mouth and forced remaining attackers to dismount and advance on foot through broken ground that favored defenders who knew how to use terrain features to their tactical advantage against enemies who relied primarily on superior numbers and firepower. Above them, Chato's Spencer carbine cracked with measured precision, each shot carefully aimed and delivered with skill of someone who had learned marksmanship in life-or-death encounters against enemies who gave no quarter and expected none in return from those they hunted across territorial wastes, Return fire spanged off rocks around Clara's position, with sharp cracks and whines of ricocheting leadstone chips stinging her face and arms, as bullets sought gaps in their cover, with deadly persistence. "He's behind you," Yaji screamed suddenly, pointing toward ledge where one of Klaus's men had worked his way around their defensive position using superior knowledge of local terrain, gained through careful reconnaissance during approach march. Clara spun toward new threat, bringing rifle up as fast as wounded shoulder would allow, despite pain that threatened to overwhelm her remaining strength, but she was moving too slowly against professional killer who had survived similar encounters through speed and ruthless efficiency. Assassin's Colt Army revolver was already leveled at her chest, finger tightening on trigger, with deliberate intent to kill woman who had stolen evidence that could destroy entire network of child exploitation and bring down men who had grown wealthy from systematic evil operating under protection of corrupt territorial government and army command structure. Time seemed to slow as Clara realized she could not possibly bring her own weapon to bear before he fired shot that would end her life and leave Yaji defenseless against men who would drag him back to underground hell where children worked until they died in darkness that never saw healing touch of sunlight or human compassion. The rifle shot that killed Assassin came from above Chato Spencer, speaking with final authority from his elevated position that commanded excellent view of entire canyon floor and all approaches that enemies might use to attack their defensive perimeter. Would-be murderer pitched forward off ledge, landing in dust with boneless finality that marked end of all earthly concerns and ambitions for wealth extracted from innocent suffering. But distraction had cost them precious seconds and tactical advantage that could not be recovered. More riders were working their way into canyon, using confusion of battle to advance on their increasingly precarious position that could not be held much longer against superior numbers and coordinated assault by professional killers who had made careers of hunting human prey. Klaus himself appeared on canyon rim above their position, studying tactical situation, with cold professional interest of predator evaluating wounded prey before delivering killing blow. "Give up now, and I guarantee safe passage for the boy," he called down to them, voice carrying clearly across stone amphitheater that had witnessed countless other dramas of life and death played out between hunter and hunted. "You're outnumbered and outgunned with nowhere left to run. No shame in accepting reality when odds are impossible." Chato's answer was rifle shot that came within inches of Klaus's head, forcing Sheriff to duck behind rocks with curse of frustrated rage at missing opportunity to end siege quickly and cleanly. "Stubborn," Klaus muttered with grudging respect for adversaries who refused to surrender despite hopeless situation. "But stupid. Time to end this charade once and for all." What followed was masterpiece of desert warfare that showcased everything Chato had learned in years of fighting Mexican and American forces across territorial wastes. He moved like smoke through ancient ruins, appearing suddenly to fire accurate shots and disappearing before return fire could find him among maze of stone walls and hidden passages carved by people who had understood defensive warfare long before Europeans brought guns and systematic cruelty to this land. Clara, despite weakening condition that threatened to overwhelm her consciousness, entirely provided covering fire that was accurate and deadly when opportunities presented themselves. Her fever-bright eyes tracked movement with predatory intensity, and her shots found their marks with precision born of maternal fury that transcended physical limitations imposed by infection and blood loss. But Klaus was learning too, adapting his tactics to counter every Apache move with professional efficiency that spoke of extensive experience hunting human prey across difficult terrain. When Chato tried to flank left through ruins, Klaus had men waiting in ambush positions. When Clara attempted to reach better cover that would provide improved fields of fire suppressing gunfire, drove her back to original position behind boulder that offered protection but limited tactical options. The decisive moment came when Klaus spotted Yazi's hiding place behind pile of ancient stones and began maneuvering his remaining men for clear shot at Boy, who represented both valuable property to be recovered and leverage that could force defenders' surrender. The message was unmistakably clear: give up stolen evidence and submit to arrest or watch child die in crossfire of final assault. Clara saw threat developing with clarity that fever and approaching death had somehow sharpened rather than dulled. With her final round, she could stop Klaus before he reached firing position, but it meant exposing herself to certain death from his remaining men, who would cut her down in revenge for their fallen comrades. She didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. Clara's shot took Klaus' center mass heavy .56 caliber bullet, spinning him around and sending his rifle clattering down canyon wall in shower of sparks struck from stone. But return fire from his surviving men caught her in chest, driving her to knees among ancient stones that had witnessed countless other acts of sacrifice and courage across centuries of human struggle against those who would destroy innocence for profit. Chato roared with grief and rage that seemed to shake canyon walls themselves, his final 2 bullets dropping men who had shot Clara with precision that spoke of warriors' training and Apache fury unleashed against those who dared harm family under his protection. Then he was moving with knife in hand, becoming terrifying legend of Apache warfare as he closed with Klaus's remaining followers in brutal close combat that left no survivors among those who had chosen to profit from children's suffering. When shooting stopped and desert silence returned to Canyon, where ancient peoples had once built cities in harmony with harsh but honest landscape, 4 men lay dead in dust that would soon claim their bodies as it had claimed countless others across geological ages. Klaus, mortally wounded, but still clinging to life with stubborn determination that had made him successful. Manhunter dragged himself toward dropped revolver with final effort to complete mission that had become personal vendetta. Chato reached him first, placing moccasined foot on Sheriff's gun hand with gentle pressure that nonetheless conveyed absolute finality of defeated enemy situation. "You want to know about Apache Way?" he asked quietly, voice carrying mixture of grief for Clara and satisfaction at justice finally served. Family protects family, always and without exception. Klaus coughed blood that spattered ancient stones with crimson testimony to price of systematic evil, finally brought to account his professional mask slipping away to reveal vicious killer beneath facade of territorial law enforcement. "Should have stayed with your own kind," he gasped through lips already turning blue as life ebbed from massive chest wound. White woman, Apache brat, never going to work in civilized society. Already working. Chato replied with quiet certainty that transcended racial boundaries and cultural differences, and Klaus saw truth of those words reflected in Warrior's eyes just before death claimed him and ended his career of hunting human beings for profit extracted from systematic cruelty. Clara lay among ruins, where ancient peoples had once sought shelter from enemies who saw them as less than human, her blood soaking into stone that had absorbed countless other sacrifices made in name of protecting innocent life from those who would destroy it for personal gain. Chato knelt beside her, cradling her head with gentle hands, while Yazi pressed close despite his own terror tears streaming down small face as he understood that woman who had saved him was dying from wounds received in final battle against systematic evil. Did we get them all?" Clara whispered through lips that were growing pale as life ebbed from bullet wound that had pierced her lung and sent crimson foam bubbling with each labored breath. "All dead," Chato confirmed with grim satisfaction. "Evidence is safe in your dress. Yazi is safe under our protection. Your promise is kept in full." Clara smiled weakly, despite pain that threatened to overwhelm her remaining consciousness. feeling Tommy's presence like warm hand on her forehead, offering forgiveness for all times she had failed to protect him from fever that no human power could defeat. She had kept sacred vow made over his small grave, had stood between innocent child and harm regardless of personal cost, had struck blow against systematic evil that would echo across territory for years to come. "Tell him," she whispered to Chato, her voice growing fainter with each word. "Tell Yaji I was honored to be his friend, even for such short time. Tell him his mother would be proud of courage he showed when everything seemed hopeless." But as her vision darkened and strength failed entirely, Clara heard something unexpected that seemed impossible, given their desperate situation, sound of approaching horses' voices calling her name across canyon walls that had seemed destined to become her tomb. Through canyon entrance rode Federal Marshal Williams with full complement of federal agents and territorial rangers, their badges glinting in afternoon sun, that suddenly seemed to promise justice rather than death for those who fought against systematic oppression. Hugh Percy had kept his word despite initial betrayal, riding harder than any man should drive horse to reach Phoenix, with copies of evidence he had prepared before sending smoke signal that nearly doomed those he was trying to help. Marshal Williams had immediately telegraphed Washington with preliminary details of conspiracy that reached into highest levels of territorial government, obtained federal warrants that superseded all local authority, and raced back with investigative team empowered to arrest anyone involved in systematic child trafficking, regardless of their official positions or political connections. They arrived to find Clara unconscious, but still breathing despite massive blood loss, Chato guarding her with grim determination that spoke of bonds forged in desert fire and Yaji safe among ancient stones that had sheltered them through their final desperate battle against forces of systematic evil operating under protection of corrupt territorial government. Dr. Laurent, who had accompanied federal expedition at Marshal Williams' request, worked through night to save Clara's life, while federal investigators examined evidence that would bring down Dietrich's entire network of child exploitation. The documents Clara and Chato had nearly died to obtain proved conspiracy reaching from territorial governors to army colonels to mining companies across Southwest systematic operation that had been buying and selling children like livestock for years while hiding behind legal protections designed to prevent exactly such abuses. Recovery was long and painful, with Clara spending weeks hovering between life and death, while infection fought against her body's determination to survive and continue fighting for children who needed protection from those who saw innocence as commodity to be exploited. But she was young and strong despite hardships, and more importantly, she had reason to live. Yaji needed advocate who understood what he had endured. And there were countless other children throughout territory who suffered in silence, while adults who should have protected them instead profited from their misery. 3 months later, Clara stood in federal courthouse in Phoenix, watching judge sentence final defendant in what newspapers had dubbed largest child trafficking prosecution in American legal history. Man who had bought and sold Apache children like livestock would spend what remained of his natural life breaking rocks in federal penitentiary, where he could contemplate evil he had inflicted on innocent victims who deserved protection rather than exploitation. Beside her, Chato wore silver badge of federal marshal, his authority extending across both territorial and reservation boundaries without distinction or limitation. Together, they had investigated dozens of operations similar to Dietrich's mine, during months of testimony and evidence gathering, freeing hundreds of children, and sending their tormentors to face justice in federal courts that could not be bought or intimidated by local corruption or political influence. The work was difficult and sometimes dangerous, requiring constant travel throughout harsh territories where such abuses flourished in isolation, maintained by those who profited from systematic cruelty. But it carried deep satisfaction of justice finally served, and innocent life protected from those who would exploit helplessness for personal gain without regard for human cost of their actions. Yazi waited for them outside courthouse, no longer terrified 6-year-old they had saved from Dusty Bill's whip, but confident 8-year-old who spoke 3 languages fluently and could track game through country that would baffle most experienced adults. He wore store-bought clothes that fit properly and kept him warm during cold desert nights, but still carried his mother's beaded wristband as reminder of where he had come from and how far he had traveled toward safety and family that valued his existence as human being rather than property to be exploited. "Is it truly finished now?" he asked as they emerged into Phoenix's dusty streets, his English now as fluent as his Apache and Spanish, thanks to education provided by territorial schools finally operating under federal oversight that ensured equal treatment regardless of racial background or cultural heritage. Clara knelt to bring herself to his eye level, studying face that had grown so dear to her over months of shared travel and investigation that had taken them throughout territory in service of justice for exploited children. He had become son she had never expected to have again, and after losing Tommy to fever while she had become mother, his heart needed to heal completely from early trauma that might otherwise have damaged him permanently. "This particular case is finished," she replied with honesty that children deserved when asking about adult world that often made little sense to innocent minds. "But there is always more work to do, more children who need help and protection from those who would harm them for profit. Are you ready for our next adventure together?" Yazi's grin was pure mischief mixed with confidence that spoke of boy who had learned that world could be dangerous, but that there would always be people willing to stand between children and harm. When adults acted with courage and moral conviction rather than selfish concern for personal safety or financial gain. "Where are we going this time?" he asked with eagerness that reminded Clara of Tommy's excitement about new places and experiences before sickness stole away his curiosity about world that had seemed full of promise and adventure. California. Chato answered, consulting latest telegram in his hand that detailed reports requiring federal investigation. Reports of Chinese children being held in conditions similar to what we discovered at Copper Gulch. Federal Commission wants our team to conduct complete investigation that will expose any similar operations and then bring perpetrators to justice. They walked toward train station together, unlikely family forged by fire and violence, but held together by bonds far stronger than blood or legal documents could ever create or destroy. Behind them, courthouse stood as monument to justice, finally served after too many years of systematic evil operating in darkness. While good people remained silent out of fear or indifference to suffering they could have prevented through courage and moral action. But ahead lay endless work of building world where no child would ever again be bought and sold like livestock, where innocence would be protected by law and defended by people willing to act on their convictions regardless of personal cost or danger to themselves and their families. It was work that would continue as long as children needed protection, and adults were willing to provide it, regardless of racial boundaries or cultural differences that seemed so important to those who profited from division and hatred. Train whistles sounded in distance, calling them toward next mission in long campaign to create justice, where none had existed before, and ensure that promises made to dying children would be kept regardless of obstacles that stood in path of those committed to protecting innocent life from systematic exploitation. Clara felt Tommy's memory settle peacefully in her heart as she watched Yazi run ahead to examine approaching locomotive with boundless curiosity of childhood, restored to safety and love. Some promises took years to keep, completely requiring dedication and sacrifice that most people would find impossible to sustain over time and distance. But they were worth every hardship, every danger, every sacrifice required to honor them properly and create a world where such promises would no longer be necessary, because society itself had evolved beyond tolerance for exploitation of helpless victims. In end, That knowledge was enough to sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead on long road toward justice that might never be completely achieved, but was always worth pursuing with every breath and heartbeat of those committed to protecting innocent life from forces that would destroy it for profit or convenience.